Hey guys, what up, Viper here, and today we have another super meta breaking new team, and this is really cool because we kind of were at the state where everything was okay, we just play this one team, we only play mirrors, and now we're back in the cycle of, well, this counters the thing that we thought didn't have a counter, and then this new thing and new thing and new thing. So this is where we're at right now. This is why I'm gonna have a lot of more videos about a lot of more teams, and why we're diving into a Shock Enchanter / Magma Enchanter team today. So let's just dive into that team and into today's video. We pretty much have this classic setup with a bunch of Illuvials, 17 Illuvials in our team. Now the really nice thing here is we only need 2 weapons because we play the same weapon in both of the different setups that we have, so there's still a decent amount of space for augments. Let's give a few words to the augments, because I think augments in most teams at the moment are relatively similar. Because if we look at this, biogenic is probably the most stable augment, standard augment everybody is running. You play biogenic, you play this grid / resolve augment, and you play techno leech in pretty much every single team. Then the most universally usable 20 cost augment is the team-wide health buff option on this one. The, what is it called, neogenic recombinator. Sometimes difficult names, but yeah, it's just very universally usable 20 cost augment. And then biogenic, techno leecher, fortification catalyst is pretty much in every single team. Redemption core is by far the best tank augment if you have tanks that have like 2000 plus HP, so you can choose the health regen option. And then capacitor and synergetic feed are essentially the ramfire augment, so you can beat Psion, which is, well, pretty much every team just runs Ramfire, so you eventually can beat the 7 Psion setups. Also getting +1 Inferno on the legendary augments, or like a couple other legendary augments, just really strong with Ramfire, so it's kind of worth it to have that in there, so your opponent is threatened that you might go and play it, so they have to prevent something, they have to do something about it, or if they don't, they just will take the whatever percentage chance that you give yourself of playing Ramfire to just win then. And then, yeah, Vitality Veil, pretty much just universally good augment as well. Again, it's good on Ramfire, it's good on melee damage dealers. It's pretty much a strong choice at the moment. Okay, let's get to the part you've been waiting for. Why Squiz Octius? Why Shock? Why this Enchanter team after it kind of had fallen out of the meta again? So basically, Shock as a synergy targets the lowest energy resistance enemy every 4 seconds with this like unavoidable lightning beam that does a lot of single target damage. If you have multiple Shock units, you kind of reach this critical mass point where you kind of just with no real counterplay assassinate those units relatively easily. Now, looking at the recent meta changes where we played a bunch of links and really heavy damage dealer rangers like behemoth rangers and things like that, those units have very low energy resistance and they hide behind not bulwarks but behind colossus. If you hide behind bulwarks, then bulwarks give the entire team resistance buffs and it's very difficult to assassinate them with the shock damage. It's just not hitting strong enough, right? They have resistance bonuses from the bulwark units. But Colossus units, they don't offer anything to the rest of the team. They themselves are super strong frontline, but the teammates, they can get assassinated, they can get sniped down by abilities or by traits or. And that makes a Shock so strong. That also kind of makes Magma really strong, but you can counterplay Magma with Resolve fairly easily. You can't counterplay Shock fairly easily because it's just single target damage that is hitting the links every 4 seconds. And then you have Squiz and Octius. Squiz raises the tentacle, calling lightning to strike the 2 lowest health enemies. Lowest health enemies, right? There's like a flat amount, not a percentage amount especially. So if the enemy team is a bunch of really big Colossus tank Illuvials, the lowest health enemy is like always going to be this Lynx or like a damage dealing ranger or Ryplans or a Mankier, like these just damage dealing Illuvials but have medium high health totals. But if the enemy would be running like 5 bulwarks, and especially Grokos, they have 1000 HP. Grokos is going to be the lowest health enemy quite frequently, not if there's a Colossus frontline. So Shock is very good at bypassing this Colossus frontline and killing the enemy damage dealers, and then eventually at some point in time, even though you're a low damage Enchanter team, you can just kill the tanks maybe in overtime, maybe eventually by just focus firing down with everything. Why 17 Illuvials? How do you play the comp and the teams and so on? Let's like briefly go over that and then jump into some gameplay as well. So usually speaking, you have different ways of playing early games and such, but you have 2 major options. One option is you bond your fire weapon to the Cacalus. You get a Shock and Enchanter with that because it's empath dominant and Psion weapon, right? And then on turn 1, you can do this Cacalus and Squiz. And then you can follow that up with 3 water bulwarks, and then you can follow that up with 2 air bulwarks and a ranger suit, and then you can follow that up with Octius and with more augments, and then you have this 5 bulwark, 3 air, 3 water, 3 shock units. I mean, you only have 2 shock trait active because Squiz and Octius are the same line, but you have the Ranger, Squiz and Octius all calling down this lightning every 4 seconds to essentially assassinate those high priority enemy targets. That is your basic setup going from turn 1 to turn 4. In that, you can drop the water bulwarks, you can add in, for example, mystic setups, you can add in other things, but you can also just play augments. Like, it is a really strong setup if you're not losing on giving the enemy team a lot of hyper or anything like that with the water bulwarks. Just sit there, upgrade your ranger weapon, upgrade ranger suit, play augments. You're probably in a good to go spot. You do want to close out the game around turn 5 though, preferably, because you just play like a bunch of really, really cheap units. If it goes to turn 6, it's very, very valid that you sell the shock setup, because the shock setup, the longer the game goes, the worse it kind of gets, and you go playing into the magma setup that the other team would run. Now, what is the other team running? How is the other team usually playing? Well, the other team most of the time is opening nowadays on a Scarabog and double Grocco, air Grocco, earth Grocco combo. So you just have this 3 bulwark plus ranger setup, and then on turn 2 you can play the Apon and the Cacculus, and you bond your ranger weapon to the Apon for Magma and Enchanter on your ranger, and then you still have essentially ranger plus 5 Illuviates, a lot of stats through bulwark, a lot of stats through Enchanter, so that's a decently strong turn 2. And then on turn 3, you had 10 leftover coins from turn 2. You can just go for Cinch and the Relentless, the Stoic Zepphelins for the 3 air, 3 earth, Magma. Just super tanky bulwark setup, the standard 5 bulwark Enchanter power play on turn 3, which is basically your strongest turn because you have all these Illuviates and you have all those stats, and Enchanter damage proc is essentially crazy damage at that point of the game that usually is enough to kill the enemy teams. And you also have Magma, which is, until opponents can play a resolve augment, a really insanely high damage trait. Magma super powerful early game trait if the enemies are standing in it. And then yeah, on turn 4, in that setup, you have 1 more Illuvial to play. You already have the Apon, so you usually follow it up with either a Dorius or with Gazer, and then you can do usually 1 augment, or you can do a ranger suit. And now the interesting thing is going into turn 5. On that setup, on turn 5, you more or less have 2 options. Either you can just go for more augments, if you have good legendary augments, if you feel like the augments right now in the matchup are strong, are impactful, go for those augments. And if you feel like these augments wouldn't really do or accomplish much, you can go ahead and sell Grocco and Scarabog, play Jotun and Seer. Just play 2 big behemoths, single target Illuviates, high health pools, Seer adding another Magma pool. Again, Magma really strong. Oftentimes you should be remembering that Techno Leecher can also reduce the enemy's grit and resolve. So if you're relying on Magma as a win condition, you do want to reduce the enemy team's grit and resolve with this augment. Very powerful. And yeah, that is like turn 5 or turn 6. Turn 6 the latest after you did all the augment upgrades and such. On turn 6 you won't want to sell Scarabog and Grocco for Jotun and Seer. And this is where we connect in to where I said earlier, if you manage to get to turn 6, if you don't kill off the opponent on turn 5 with the shock version of the team, you might as well just sell the water bulwarks, sell Squiz Octius, and just go into this Magma behemoth setup, which at turn 6 is just going to be outperforming the other options because it's just, well, more late game units, more powerful things in play. Basically, you're just like having more stats. And the other version with the super cheap bulwarks, super cheap Squiz and Octius, just it loses strength late game because shock is also not a scaling damage dealing thing, it's a flat damage dealing thing. And flat damage dealing thing is just less valuable if the opponent has 8 Illuvials and a ranger and a bunch of augments, like everything upgraded. You're not quickly assassinating anything anymore, really. Alright, let's jump into some gameplay and just look at the basic positioning and what you want to be doing, right? So there's a game versus O-Race. I think he's, at the moment I'm recording this, he's actually sitting on rank 1 and rank 2 on his main and first Smurf account. So certainly a very high level mirror match to watch out for. And yeah, it's pretty much mirror. He's running a Terra Lynx and I think like 1 different augment or something. That is about it. A slightly different suit. It's basically a mirror. Like slightly different preferences, right? Now we can look at legendary augments. Lifestorm, Entropy, and so let's look here. There's a difference in what we value here. Entropy is obviously the best augment. Having more Omegas casted on Enchanter units that have this insane ability when Omegas casted, energy regen on them, super, super good. Lifestorm, very, very good once you have a Techno Nature to reduce the enemy's grit and resolve, because then this is like another Magma proc around your Illuvia, and 50 health regen is very powerful. Titans is very powerful once it gets to this behemoth part of the mirror. So once it gets to like turn 5 or turn 6 behemoth play. Also Titans, depending on how the positioning plays out, whatever unit you give this, if it can tank like 4 or 5 enemies, it generally gets a lot more healing and damage mitigation value than Lifestorm, and the Lifestorm damage part needs Techno Nature. So it kind of depends on what we value here. Lifestorm is probably better on turn 5 because we don't really have to do Behemoth on turn 5, you can play for tank stats, and Titans is certainly better turn 6 onwards because then you do play versus those Behemoths usually. Also, you don't really play full overtime fights anymore. Now, this is the standard turn 1 that I tend to do nowadays on this, just like slightly behind the front line so that my Lynx and my Cinch can still fit in here later if I want to, and just going for the 100 points on a triple Bulwark. I don't have the craziest traits or anything, but it's a good setup, it's good units, and it's an okay turn 1 versus a lot of the meta at the moment, because the meta is either playing super strong turn 1s that you can't win anyways, where I would just skip the turn 1 as well and not give away my positioning, or the meta is playing relatively weak turn 1s where the free Bulwark setup is enough. Now Always decides to skip turn 1, hide his positioning here, then this is usually the standard turn 2 on my side, where you want to go for the monkey relatively in front, maybe leaning to the middle, maybe leaning to left or right, depending on what your opponent did in the early game. You usually can put a Cinch slightly in front of the monkey the next turn. At this turn already, the monkey has free earth, it has a team-wide Bulwark buff, the unit is relatively tanky, and it can stun the enemies, and then your other units come in and they help with stun or they take aggro away. Then the CAC is the same as in every other melee carry matchup, as far in the back as possible. You want it to arrive in the front line as late as possible, because if you play melee versus melee damage dealers, same thing as always, the guy that arrives first attacks the enemy tank, the guy that arrives second attacks the enemy damage dealer usually, so the guy that arrives second usually wins. Then our Ranger, even though there's no Magma yet, wants to be like somewhere in the middle-ish, because there's a triple Earth unit, which is a +1 hyper to air, and Fire is a -1 hyper to air. So we want to debuff the hyper of the enemy Cacculus this turn in the mirror, because if the Cacculus gets hyper, you tend to just lose this turn. Now you can see here, he goes for the Cac in the middle, so his Cac can just like walk in the middle and not be on the edge and not be focused by this. Totally valid play, not going for the like high risk, high reward kind of thing like I tend to do with the full corner positioning. Then again, I think full corner later on is just going to outperform this, because later on this is not going to walk to the middle anymore. Later on it's going to walk to one or the other sides, unless you reposition obviously. And yeah, you also can see on this positioning here, is essentially we can kill off this Grocko. It's like the outer unit for both of us kill the Grocko, but then this has a positioning where it's not attacking my guy, it's attacking my monkey here, and then my Cac is gonna attack this. So this middle positioning did not really work out really well, I guess. So we can skip forward, win this turn, deal some damage, and then turn 3. Oh yeah, another important thing to note on turn 2 positioning, especially in the mirror, you want your Cac to be on the opposing side of your Scaraborg. You want the Scaraborg Omega to cast towards your Cac and to just help it, right? Like maybe the Cac is fighting some units, maybe it's getting wrecked even, so you just want to support it. And the Scaraborg Omega targeting the furthest enemy is usually the furthest frontline enemy here-ish. So the Scaraborg will cast, it will help the guy, and it's also more damage by the Scaraborg Omega, so that you can just single target focus down the things that the Cac is targeting with the Omega. Outside of that, again, Cinch here frontline protecting the monkey thing, Lynx frontline protecting the monkey thing. Also, you want Cac and Lynx to be on the same side, because the Lynx has a really high single target, or not single target, a really high AoE damage dealing ability, but it is also like essentially significant single target damage. So combining that with the Cac, very good. It helps focusing down units, and focusing down units is the important thing in the mirror anyways, because oftentimes it goes to overtime, and having more units alive in overtime is a very very, very significant. Now you see the different setups here where, yeah, just like the different frontline setups. I don't know what else to say. What else there is too much to say about this. Essentially, the way this played out is I have double Grokko and this guy attacking enemy Grokko, and I have my Lynx casting on it, so we are quickly focusing down this. You see, a lot of single target damage to just kill stuff here, while on the other side, my opponent has a lot of units focusing down my guys. Now, I had slightly stronger tanks on this unit, on this side, so with the slightly stronger tanks on this side, this is just slightly working out better for me, I guess. Also, just getting another Lynx cast here, very, very massive, certainly. And it's a close win again. Yeah, here on these augments, Magma Affinity Chip I think is very, very strong because Magma Affinity Chip is weak on turn 4 and it's very strong on turn 5 especially, because turn 5 is a turn where you still play for overtime, you don't have enough damage to kill each other's team before overtime, and if you if you go for the Grid Resolve debuff augment, having an additional Magma pool is kind of really, really crazy, because sure, it doesn't do much in the first like 20-30 seconds of the fight, but once the Grid and Resolve is gone from the enemy team, Magma is dealing crazy amounts of damage per second to the entire enemy team. Also, getting the Grid buff to your team is pretty relevant. And then Void Cleaver Catalyst versus Devourer. Devourer, again, probably a stronger augment on turn 4, maybe on turn 5 even. Certainly is stronger until like Behemoths and such come in. Void Cleaver Catalyst, a stronger augment once you have this extra single target damage of the Behemoths. So me being in a spot where I won the first 3 rounds, I certainly value the Void Cleaver Catalyst more, because there is going to be a turn 6, and on turn 6 I think that augment certainly outperforms the Devourer augment. And yeah, I think Magma augment very strong on turn 5 especially. And again, I will have a turn 5, I will be able to play for turn 5. If I just hard win one turn, I win the game. So that's why we go for those augments. I think Magma augment is very undervalued by a lot of people in this matchup, because they tend to not go Techno Leecher for Grid Resolve reduction, they tend to go Techno Leecher for energy reduction, which I'm not certain is correct. I certainly believe the Resolve reduction is worth more, because just how much damage mitigation there is from Grid and Resolve in these incredibly long fights, I think it's more relevant than delaying an Enchanter cast slightly. Now on this turn you usually want to play Gazer in this matchup, because Gazer can get hyper, and Gazer also is the better overtime healing unit than Ardorius. You preferably want to position Gazer away from the enemy Cacalus, so the enemy Cacalus doesn't get the hyper of it, of a water Illuvium that you play, and you want to position your guy away from the enemy air units, which for example the Cacalus is, which then just, yeah, like the enemy guy doesn't get hyper, you get hyper, that's your goal, right? Now here, I do have the single target kill damage augment on the enemy Grokko, but I don't know, we don't have the craziest damage output, and there's a lot of healing, and there's more shielding from the Stellar Devourer enemy Kak as well. The annoying thing in this fight, if we look at how things turned out, with the Gazer positioning, I guess especially, is that my Singe is getting attacked by a lot of units, so my Singe is kind of just dying, right? But both Gazers got hyper, they start to sustain the entire teams. We see my Kak had a lot of single target damage on the Grokko, but it like isn't really finishing off this Lynx. That is very, very annoying. If this just would be finished off quicker, would be nice. But we still see I have more single target damage essentially. I can focus down single units slightly quicker, which is really, really strong in overtime, because the more units you have, the more damage you do to your opponent, the less damage you take. But then in the end, I think it's the slight difference of Stellar Devourer being a stronger AoE damage augment and a stronger... It's more AoE damage and it's more AoE shields, which is certainly very, very good on especially turn 4, because we don't have like all the extra damage and utility augments and so on in, like I explained before. Void Cleaver is gonna be able to pop off in the future. Now we bring in Techno Nature, we bring in Biogenic, 2 best utility augments. Then I decide against Techno Nature here, which I think in hindsight is a mistake, because I was very worried about this being super, super focused by everything. That's why I put double defensive augment. This is overkill. You don't need double defensive augment on this turn. One of these 2 would have been enough, and the other one could have just been a Techno Nature. And then Techno Nature would probably be outperforming this. Now, the thing about Techno Nature, preferably, you want to play it on turn 4 if you go for the Grid Resolve reduction, because Magma is the most impactful on turn 4 and on turn 5. So if you want to go for the Technology thing, you get the most value out of it in those 2 turns. Because on turn 6 onwards, the energy like stealing part would be stronger again. Therefore, it is a bit tricky in terms of how the health totals of players work out and so on. But usually just like default turn 4, instead of legendary augment, you can just go for Technology resolve reduction. But if you have really strong legendary augments, you go for legendary augments. And then on turn 5, it's a tricky decision that kind of comes down to positioning and also how much points you have to spare in terms of changing positionings and such. Biogenic for anti-energy in probably almost any matchup, maybe anti-healing in some matchup, but biogenic, super powerful augment. And also one of the like tank augments like Redemption Core, usually want to put that on Lynx or on a Cinch as well on turn 5, because you want to support your front line, and your bulwarks are really tanky units. They have a lot of shield, they have a lot of healing support, so this health region makes them almost immortal. Very good. But yeah, this is a bit of a different game because there's 2 legendary augments in play, and therefore we can't play all the standard augments, make all the standard plays. Now Always does positioning swap here, which eventually leads to his Calculus attacking my Calculus. That is certainly very strong because it's stealing energy with Devourer. My guy isn't really casting, this guy is going to be casting a lot quicker. On the other hand though, I have this like super immortal tank here, and you can see in this fight, the enemy Lynx, due to the positioning switch and such, isn't even attacking my guy. So my guy is really not that big in danger of dying, and double tank augment was overkill. It could have been Techno-Leecher, could have been a utility augment for sure. But yeah, 1 tank augment certainly needed, 2 rarely needed. Here in this case, opponent also switched positioning, so it's a bit hard to tell how well it would have performed in the other setup. Now, we can also see this fight, enemy Gazer gets hyped, but there's like a lot of stuff that's like just going poorly for me, I guess. But my opponent, from changing positioning and such, I have a Ranger suit equipped, opponent doesn't have a Ranger suit equipped, and I have slightly more single target healing on my tank here. So my tank is staying alive longer into overtime, and I have a bit more damage, but it's just not cutting it, right? It's again this, like on turn 5, these augment combos are just slightly stronger, and that is making a big difference. It's just more AoE damage going into overtime. But it's again what I had explained, where we, on the legendary augments, we didn't play for turn 4 or 5, right? We played for turn 6. We played for the single target damage once we have those behemoths in play. So you can't play for winning every single turn. That's not always correct. Sometimes you can use your health as a resource, and that is how this matchup shifts from this super long overtime fights to now with the double behemoth in, you go from a 5 bulwark super tank comp to a lot more damage dealing comp, especially in the mirror, because you can single target focus things down. So let's check out this positioning here, right? We have essentially, this is what you usually did with the Lynx, where Lynx in the corner and the 2 berserkers in front. We do the same thing here. And then we have, well, our tanks in the front. We have our Techno-Leecher on the monkey now as well. And yeah, that's like about it. Used all my points, did some positioning adjustments this turn. Now, Always also did positioning adjustments, but as you guys can see, now we sadly didn't get the triple focus on the same unit, but we have a double focus on enemy Gazer that is likely strong enough to win this turn, and we have a really big tank in front. Now, positioning adjustment by my opponent was fundamentally very good, because my opponent did not focus the strong tank first, focused like the weak tank first, and can push through here, which obviously is not good for me. But at this point, because I had essentially done a lot less positioning adjustments and I have stronger legendary augments for this part of the game, I'm just going to be literally stat checking my opponent, right? I just have the bigger tank, I just have more single target damage. Therefore, these rounds are essentially pretty easy at this point. And yeah, this is essentially the reward for winning the round 1, 2, 3. I don't like sacrificing turn 1 for positioning in a matchup like this even, because if you, yeah, like I can just play for better legendary augments for late game, and that is then very scary for my opponent. Just gives them more chances to lose essentially. Now turn 7, well, the team is not that top end heavy. The game usually ends on turn 6 nowadays. Rarely there is a turn 7. On turn 7, probably some final positioning adjustments, and then like a couple last few augments. The augments are not super impactful. Certainly prioritize your positioning in most of these matchups. Now, what do we want to accomplish in this matchup here? Well, we want to accomplish that the monkey guy is stunning enemies and buffing my guys. Sure, that's really, really good. And we want to accomplish that the guy with the double super strong tank augment is the first to tank more damage. And then we can just give like an untargetable to one of the behemoths and such, for example. Certainly checks out. Then, well, just like random last augment, some points to spare. It is what it is. Extra energy is nice. A first cast on Gazer quicker, first chomp on Jotun quicker, first enchanter procs quicker, and also first techno leecher debuff to the enemy team quicker. All of that can really matter. And yeah, outside of that, we can see opponent swapped Gazer for Dorius. I think this is a really smart play. I probably should have done this as well. Gazer is not that strong in the single target damage status of the game anymore. Certainly Dorius is probably outperforming here because it can single target heal units and we're not going to overtime, so it's really good play by Ores there that I had forgotten at this point. I even had points left to spend. But yeah, overall you can see my positioning here. We have just a triple damage dealer focus on this unit, and for my opponent, if you want to replay this, so the way his frontline is here, it is a lot easier for, like, his frontline just walks to frontline and they have a very straight path here. So it's like pretty easy for me to have a triple focus on one unit. Whereas on the other side, for my frontline is not really walking in a straight line here. So yeah, he just doesn't get the triple focus on the same unit. He gets to focus this with most of his team, but then these two are not focusing my tank, and my tank can just health regen back up basically. Very, very important, so the cinch doesn't get bursted down, and the health regen and armor stacking, augments, physical resistance stacking, augments can just do their job, and my tank just stays alive while my triple damage guys just keep focusing down units one by one. And eventually it gets to the point where there's not enough damage anymore and too much physical resistance gains from legendary augments, so it's just an easy win, which made the difference between Gazer and Dorius not matter, right? This is essentially just positioning mattered more than like a better unit or not even. Also, legendary augment Void Cleaver certainly did a whole lot here. Yeah, just like better legendary augments on the late game. So there goes that. I think that was a really, really good showcase for the mirror and a pretty deep dive because the game went very, very long. I would say fundamentally the swap to behemoths, you probably want to do it on turn 6 if you're in a good position on turn 5. If you feel confident on turn 5, you can easily just stay on the bulwark setup, add some augments, add ranger suits, play all the utility stuff, and then on turn 6 swap to the behemoths. You can also pretty much do this positioning in most other matchups. Now, I can't cover the positioning for every single matchup, obviously. Just try to default this positioning where you have like the middle setup for the Magma and the tanks in front, and just like, you know, it's just a good universal positioning, especially if you don't really know what you play against. If you play against a bunch of rogues, obviously put your bulwarks in the back, have the bulwarks tank the rogues at first. That is very, very crucial there. Outside of that, if you want more specific matchup knowledge and positioning and so on, go check out my Twitch VOD or go find me live on Twitch like pretty much every day, and you can see a lot of more different matchups and setups and positionings for that. Appreciate everybody that was watching the video and made it this far. I hope this is gonna give you another fun team to play. I hope this is gonna help you climb the leaderboard, and see you guys in the next one.